This follow-up to what is a thesis-based paper, I'm going to talk about how to add tension to a thesis. So let's talk first of all about what makes a good thesis by examining what makes a bad thesis. And you want to be sure to use specific nouns, active verbs in creating this thesis statement. So overly broad, vaguely worded theses help neither the writer nor the reader, and it is the writer that the thesis helps more than anyone else. So if I begin with the local economy is bad, well, that's certainly a sentiment, that's an idea, but if you break it down to its parts, the local economy, whatever that is a very weak verb, bad, a vague, non-specific, pointless word. None of those are going to help the writer in any way. But if we use specific nouns, inadequate spending and education, inadequate spending on education and infrastructure, very specific idea, threatens, terrific verb, the county's ability to attract new businesses, again, very specific ideas, then that's a thesis that's going to work really well. So here are some kinds of weak thesis statements. A thesis that makes no real claim at all. This paper will examine the pros and cons of arming school teachers. A thesis that is obviously true or a statement of fact, exercise is good for you. There really is not much you can write after that statement. Everyone knows this is true, even people who don't exercise. A thesis that makes an overly broad claim. Individualism is always a good thing. Individualism, whatever that means. A good thing, whatever that means. So what we're looking for instead is something along the lines of what we talked about before. Now, one other thing your thesis needs is tension. And so in order to be heard, you need to connect to what others are saying, and that's sort of the purpose of the idea of adding tension. In order for your ideas to matter, they need to be seen in relation to an ongoing discussion. So a weak thesis will simply lay out a list. The paper will say blank, blank, and blank. An effective thesis statement contains tension. Although blank, blank. That is to say, in that first blank, although this is what most people think, although people have tried other aspects, although this particular set of facts is true, the thing I'm going to talk about is more important, more relevant, more interesting. So here's a list thesis versus a tension thesis. Limited opportunities and economic inequality can be linked to blank, blank, and blank. Well, this is a pretty good thesis statement. It could certainly work, and you would understand at least where the paper's going. But by adding tension, we can sort of separate what we think our reader already knows or already believes or already is willing to accept from the more important thing. So while most people understand that limited opportunities and economic inequality can be linked to factors like blank and blank, the most overlooked obstacle to attaining the American dream is blank. So that third idea I'm going to get to, that's going to be the more interesting, more provocative kind of notion. And I've set the thesis up to reflect that. So how do you go about adding thesis? Well, if we take these two, again, perfectly adequate thesis statements, inadequate spending on education and infrastructure threatens the county's ability to attract new businesses, and you take the second one, the millions of immigrants, both documented and undocumented, that come to America each year make it harder and harder for Americans to attain the American dream. And here's how we would go about adding thesis to it. Let's take the new business one first. So here you would imagine that my introductory paragraph describes current efforts to attract new business, and those would be tax credits and interest-free loans. This is often what localities do to attract new businesses. Something I've always thought is kind of counterproductive. I don't think the national economy benefits when a company relocates from Oklahoma to North Carolina. The national economy benefits when a new company starts or when new people are hired. It's not moving the chess pieces around so much as creating new pieces. But that said, that's what a lot of localities do, and maybe in this particular case, I begin by acknowledging those. So you'll see that becomes the sort of the tension that's added to the idea of the need for education and infrastructure. We need to do that because the other things we've tried are not adequate or just a start. So that first statement, these plans to offer tax credits and interest-free loans to businesses willing to relocate are a start, but ultimately they will not be enough. Years of inadequate spending on education and infrastructure threaten the county's ability to attract new businesses. So in other words, we can try these other things, but end of the day, we never get away from the fact that until we invest money in education and infrastructure, the county can't attract new businesses. In the case of the other idea, here's a case where I take that original notion about immigrants competing for jobs, and I add to it some tension with an idea in opposition to that, a different perspective. So the part I've added here is, while conservatives like Romer continue to claim that immigration is a positive demographic growth pattern that boosts the national economy, the reality remains that millions of American workers find themselves competing against foreign workers right here in America. This competition drives down the wages of working class people. Now, there are two reasons I like this addition. One is it connects to an ongoing discussion. That's this character, Tim Romer, who had written sort of defensive American immigration policy, at least as it was 10 or 15 years ago. I also like it because it kind of reverses the way this issue is typically presented. Normally we think of conservatives being the ones who are opposed to immigration and liberals the one in favor of immigration, but the issue is much more complicated than that. And if you push both sides, you would quickly realize that economic conservatives, anyway, certainly understand that immigration, population growth is essential for an economy to grow. That's the positive demographic growth pattern of that idea. If you push liberals on this idea, they'll say yes, immigrants do compete and drive down the wages of working class people, something liberals are supposed to be more concerned with. So there's a case where that tension helps add that dimension to it. Now, on the other side of the issue, we could do the similar thing with something like this. While many voices inside and outside of government rail against immigrants for stealing the jobs of American workers and driving down wages, the simple truth remains that the millions of immigrants, both documented and undocumented, that come to America each year are the driving force for much of the nation's economic growth. That's what makes immigration a really complicated issue. This is as true as the other one. And without the influx of people, it's hard for any nation's economy to grow. So here the tension is added by sort of giving voice to the people with this maybe automatic disfavor for immigration. Here's the whole point. So as I mentioned in the previous video, the controlling questions, why, what makes, that's going to be the driving focus of this particular paper. To developing a good thesis is to recognize, first of all, what your main point is, and also to understand what those major divisions of your paper are going to be. So in other words, what is your controlling question, and what are the multiple answers to that controlling question? If you have 3 answers to that question or 4 answers to that question, then you probably have identified the major divisions of your paper, what the paragraphs are going to be about. So if I were to write, my controlling question is, why has teaching cursive handwriting become less important in recent years? Well, A might be technology. B would certainly be the standards of Common Core. Love it or hate it, but it certainly has had an impact here. C would be changes in, I think, educational focus, the understanding that not all children learn handwriting at the same, or benefit from it at the same way. So we might have different teaching philosophies. Those are 3 reasons that might have led to that change, and that then would become the basis of my paper. So in the forum this week, you're going to submit the controlling question and then 3 ways to divide the topic based on the answers to the controlling question. So as you ask that question, as you come up with the answers to it, that is where the structure, overall paragraph by paragraph structure of your paper will come into focus. So that'll be the form assignment this week. Thanks for watching.